Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the AIM Growth Partners podcast, the podcast where we tap into the minds and share the stories of some of the most inspiring and interesting leaders from across cybersecurity, AI, and emerging tech. My name's David Loader and I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Chris Stephenson, who is the head of AI strategy and operations at Nuix. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. Great to be here.
Chris, for those who don't already know who you are, people that kind of aren't in your network, please could we begin with a bit of an introduction to yourself and your background? Take us up to where you are today at Nuix.
That's a dangerous question because you could get, depending on the time of day, you could get a long or a short answer. But no, not at all. So again, started in basically in college, I studied journalism, to be frank. I think that's given me a leg up in technology, frankly, because the ability to communicate complex subjects like technology, information technology, AI, pretty soon now quantum, it takes it takes unique skill writing and communicating those complex topics. So I came through a journalism degree, moved into Boston where I live and work now. Um, at the time, it was really hard to find the kind of job I wanted in a newspaper. I really felt like I was going to be the next Woodward and Bernstein. And I didn't know much about computers, honestly. I ended up getting a temporary position with Computer Sciences Corporation, actually. But it was really not a technical position. It was really more of an assistant role, but it was in the IT department. And so I'm nothing if I'm not an opportunist. And so one thing led to another, and I became the sort of second in command of the IT team that was kind of recently, there was going through a rebuild, and my boss at the time started teaching me the ropes, walking me around, showing me how to install software. The next thing I knew, I was flying on planes to San Francisco and Chicago, setting up new networks and connecting them all together. And uh, it led to us leaving that company and starting our own company together, which is still in operations, iCore Technologies. What I realized 10, 15 years into that is that I'm really more of an entrepreneurial technologist. And so it started to feel like a job. And we made an agreement with my business partners. And so I'm still on the board and still engaged in that company, but I left to start a couple of startups. And that got me into AI. The most recent one was acquired by Nuix. So that is how I ended up here in this role. Nuix is a Sydney-based software company that really focuses on investigative intelligence. So if you think about some of the largest investigations that have taken place across the world, from Panama Papers to the Grenfell Towers incident in London to Dieselgate, and then some of the ones that I'm not allowed to talk about because they're either ongoing or they're in the front page of the newspaper and we don't need to talk about that. But it's very likely that our software is involved in that. And so Nuix has an incredible reputation over 25 years of making data searchable at scale. They acquired our natural language processing company, our startup out of Boston called Topos Labs, and we were making data understandable at scale. So when you put those two together, you're now able to understand data across all elements very rapidly. And as data volumes grow, this becomes more and more important, especially in light of the risks of data, such as data breach, cyber breach, which are on the rise, scams and fraud, but also the complexity of the volume of data itself, the velocity of which it's coming, the variety of the sources that it's coming from, and the sheer volume of it make managing and handling data a massive challenge for virtually any organization. But how about trying to solve crimes right? Or, across borders with budgets that are not growing, they're shrinking, under intense pressure. How do you manage that? Well, you need tools. It's not just tools. AI is really the enabler that's allowing us to now address this unstructured data, which is really 80 to 90% of all data. So I find I've come full circle from a journalism degree to work that focuses on how to handle this thing we call language, if you think about it. And so I find it fascinating that it's come full circle back to my roots, which is just understanding language, but doing it from images, pictures, videos, text at scale to solve real world problems. So it's been an exciting journey, still ongoing. Uh, and knock on wood, it'll continue that way. So that brings you up to date with where I am. And actually today, I'm lucky I was able to make it today. I just got back from Ottawa, Canada. We were talking to some government officials there, longtime organizations that have leveraged Nuix and are excited about what we're doing with AI. So we were talking them through that and how AI can truly help impact their work. I can't really talk about the organizations I met with, but it's an exhilarating time to be in this space.
Bet it is. And thanks for such a kind of a comprehensive introduction. I think one of the things that I was kind of really interested that I'm glad you kind of mentioned that journalistic background and how that has enhanced your ability to take the technical and translate it to non-technical audiences. Whereas it's something that the technologists themselves, these really techie people, have a very hard time.
Absolutely. The liberal arts background has been actually, we've got some of our best employees. When we had that startup prior to being acquired, we got a philosophy major who ended up becoming our product manager. We had masters in literature become the head of our model building because we had made a model builder that a non-technical person could use. We needed linguistic skills and create critical thinking skills, and along with a little bit of elbow grease. And that goes a long way in this space. And I have talked to several others who have found that it's easier to teach people technical skills. It's harder to find people who can think critically and who understand language and communication. What's interesting is as AI starts to take some of the jobs away, the ones that are being elevated are the things that are truly human, the ability to communicate effectively, to think critically, to think outside the box and creatively and creativity and so on. So anyway, yeah, I know that's probably more than you expected to get out of that, but I do think you're onto something there in terms of watching who is able to present
Mm.
these companies, these concepts more effectively. And it's typically those who don't have the technical background, but they have the communication skills.
Well, it fills me with hope being the most tech illiterate person, knowing that some of these people, most powerful people, or most impactful people, I should say, are the ones that actually haven't come from technical backgrounds. So that's great. And I guess, moving on to the actual role and scope, because I think you've kind of carved out your own job really at Nuix following the acquisition. I know AI is something, as you've mentioned already, something that's so important to you. And so talk to me around the kind of the formation of your role and what the kind of the day-to-day looks like as the head of AI strategy and operations at Nuix.
Yeah, it's a great question because one of the things when I established this role, so I should say when we came in the first couple of years after being acquired, I remained the head of that group through that transition to make sure that the tech was integrated properly, that the people understood their roles. And then, of course, the idea was that was all going to dissolve and these people would be absorbed into the organization, into their rightful areas, and the technology is fully integrated. So I worked my way out of a job, which was the whole idea. And then, AI was fairly new. It was sort of because of the emerging capabilities of it. We hadn't had a role that was overseeing that. So I basically said, look, I think we need someone that can head this up, particularly because we didn't really have any AI governance in place. So most of my role right now, or I would say 2/3 of my role, is really involved in making sure that we do AI responsibly and that we talk that advocate for that outside our bounds too. So our mission at Nuix is to be a force for good. And that means we do as much as we can here to be a profitable company and compete aggressively, but we also have a greater good to society. And so it's as stewards of AI, we need to be very responsible with how we do it. And so that aligned well with the mission. And the C-suite bought into that whole idea. And I worked closely with the data privacy officer here and with our general counsel with full backing by the C-suite and the CEO and the board to create an AI policy, the first AI policy that we have, and a set of AI principles that are not just talking points. They're not just marketing statements, but they can be demonstrable in our activities with AI within our product. That was very important to us, that we didn't just have this be a fluff marketing campaign, but really that when we found these principles, not that we can adhere to every single one to the fullest degree, but that it gives us a true North Star for our focus. So when we look at bringing on new AI features into the system, we have a set of guidelines that help guide our decision making. So a lot of what I do is to take requests or new ideas from the product team or from others that say we'd like to leverage this AI. How do we do that? I help to shepherd that through our responsible AI process, which is now becoming automated into an automated third-party workflow to make sure that it's consistent through a company called Trustable, really, really great tech. And I also advocate for responsible AI and help educate the organization on what that means. And so there's an educational thought leadership aspect of that internally. I also take that show on the road, so to speak, and do presentations, advocacy, part of a few AI safety groups. And I'll sit on panels and do some of that external sort of evangelizing for safe, responsible, trustworthy AI as well. And then I would say, so that's all of that, roughly 60% of my job. The rest of the time is a lot of pre-sales and sales support because most of our customers are thirsty for knowledge about what this stuff does and how we're doing it, why we should do it one way or another, how do they get adoption, how do they navigate regulations. So that's the other sort of 40% of my job. And then chief bottle washer after that. It's a fairly small company for what it is. We get involved in a whole bunch of different areas, but those are the two main aspects of my job.
Amazing. And what I liked about that is you quite quickly sort of identified as this isn't just a marketing kind of campaign or slogan. This is how we actually implement it and ensure that we kind of adhere to it. And I guess I'm interested on talking about that kind of the 40% of the business where you are involved in sales. What, I guess, competitive advantages or what are you noticing really kind of landing and resonating with your customers? And I guess to provide some more context around that question, I think to your point, everyone's grappling with and wanting to adopt AI, yet people are aware whether they can actually pinpoint and articulate the risks, they know there are risks out there. So I guess having this framework in place and, this governance structure in place, how much of an advantage or how much have you seen that kind of resonating with some of the customers you've been speaking to?
It's a huge advantage. And we kind of knew that as we were going through it, that not only that it would be harder to do it this way, but it would pay off because we could have easily run out and adopted ChatGPT and built a wrapper around it and gone to market and called it innovation. That would have been the easy button. We probably wouldn't even have taken too many lumps early on that because we would have got to market early on certain things. But I think we really took a more cautious and thoughtful approach to it, especially because we're a publicly traded company, number one. Number two, we work with highly regulated industries. So we work with some of the largest police forces around the world, the 100 top regulators around the world, the 10 top banks, the largest law firms and legal service providers around the world. So we needed to really measure twice and cut once. And we knew that would pay off as well, as much as we were being pushed and pushed. And it was not easy because we were in a tight spot and often seen, it's not fun being the wet blanket, right? That slows things down or tries to get people to think twice about these things. But I do think that's paid off. So now as the rubber band is snapped back a little bit and people have seen some of the challenges and gotten their hand slapped, if you will, and worse, some folks have lost their jobs
Wow.
over these kind of situations. In fact, we've had clients come to us and say, listen, we tried to roll out generative AI and it blew up in our face. We exposed customer data. We exposed sensitive personal data. We got inaccurate results. We wasted millions of dollars. And so, unfortunately, nothing else worse from there. Like there were no lawsuits or no
Wow.
fines or anything like that. They caught it when it was just millions of dollars lost and not, reputational loss. So I think it's really important to recognize two things. One, that all AI is not generative AI. And because I think people confuse that, David. I don't know if you're seeing this. When people talk AI, they really think that you're talking about large language models or generative AI. And it's a big deal, but it's not all of AI. And not all business problems should be or can be solved with generative AIs. Everything that happened before 2002 when ChatGPT threw this out into the market, there's so much you can do with traditional machine learning and even non-AI automation we find can be highly effective. So what we had in our arsenal was the technology they bought from Topos Labs, the traditional machine learning based natural language processing. They had a patented processing engine that basically rips data down to the studs and finds hidden files and all of that stuff, which is critical because getting the data right is critical to AI outcomes. So as I was talking to these folks yesterday in Ottawa, and I was saying, look, a lot of people just are looking way to the right and saying, we can solve our problems now because AI is here to save us. And they're missing the entire front half of that, which is how do you get your data organized and in shape to do these things? So to come back to your question, it's a thoughtful way to think about the entire issue, inclusive of the data. So it's when you think about AI and doing it responsibly and defensively, you have to think about the non-AI parts. How are you integrating AI into the system? How are you thinking about the data that's getting fed into the system? Those are not sexy. They're painful, but they're critical to the outcome. It's like a foundation of a building. You can rush through that and build the tallest building in the world. It's not going to stand for very long. So if at the end of the day, your data is not if the output isn't trustable, then you've got a major problem, right? So the whole idea was to build something that's defensible and that we can stand on and say, this is trustworthy. And to build in some safeguards too. We colorize the output for non-Nuix owned models for things that we can't really control. We say, listen, this is a generative output. You should give this a second look. And it's not important just to say that, but to make a coloration change, similar to the way in newspapers when something is more of a sponsored piece of content as opposed to a native, sort of natural investigative journalistic exercise. There's a different tint to it. That's kind of how we're thinking, and also making sure that we put it in the metadata, which model supplied this information. So again, that's not easy stuff. And it's not sexy stuff, but it's important. And when you explain that to the customer, they start to get it because they realize, wait a minute, you guys are keeping your eye on the wall. You're standing on the wall, watching guard, so to speak. So when I use your software, I don't need to think about those things because this stuff keeps people up at night. There are many people who don't use AI at all, or they are saying we can't use it because they're afraid about the unknown. If we can help them and recognize that we've gone the extra mile to mitigate those challenges. So a long-winded way of saying we really took time to do the hard things right. And we see that paying off now because we can look people in the eye and say, we have a responsible policy and process, and we've baked that into everything we do. And when you come on the journey with us, you get that. You get to come along on that ride with us. And so you don't need to be 100% thinking about all that stuff. Additionally, why that helps pay off is because more and more people are coming to us asking us for the documentation and saying, we need to check this box. Or there's a governance team that's coming and asking and saying, much the way that GDPR did back in the day, where everyone had to fill out the surveys and the questionnaires and all that stuff. When you have a good story to tell, it's easier to answer those questionnaires.
I think you've helped kind of illuminate, kind of shine a light on the kind of the ugly side of AI. And I think that's so necessary to do because, to your point, it's not all glamorous and all sexy. And quite often like AI and automation can kind of be used interchangeably when they shouldn't be. And furthermore, when people are talking about AI, they're talking about usually quite a slim slither of AI. To your point, it's ChatGPT or something like that, maybe a point solution, a tool that can kind of automate, enhance, and expand some sort of capability. But what you shone a light on is the less kind of glamorous, less sexy side of things that does require a lot of kind of operational rigor and a lot of time commitment as well, which is almost seemingly a bit of a paradox. But, in the front end, it does take a lot of time to get these things right. So I guess with that being said, Nuix is obviously very forward thinking and very pro AI in their approach. Talk to me around some of the kind of the headaches or challenges you encountered when actually trying to implement AI, because I'm sure not everyone was probably bought into it in the same way. What were some of the challenges, surprises you kind of came up against?
I think they're the traditional ones, right? So first of all, doing anything different or anything that presents an obstacle to someone getting something done is always a challenge. So change management is one of the hardest things, right? I would say internally, we didn't really have that much pushback on implementing any of this. I think initially there was kind of a, why, right? Who cares? Maybe a little bit of a collective eye roll, right? And then people started to get it, right? But I think the most important challenge that I have seen is truly managing the workflow, because as requests come in for, well, we need to do face detection, we need to do handwriting recognition, we need to do, semantic search, it was a snowball effect. And suddenly the one risk assessment that you're doing every month turns into 2 a week. You now have a problem because you're not set up for that. So we really needed to think about, how do we make not just so we have the policy, that's great. We even have people aware of the policy, that's great, and our principles and all that. But now how do we handle the flow? How does it get consistent? How can we report on this to the board and say, here's what we're doing? So we needed a system to actually do that. And that took some time to think through which system we're going to reuse and all of that stuff. So again, we ended up going with Trustable, but that was a whole process. And the third thing, I think, so just the day-to-day operational elements of that, was a challenge. And we've dramatically improved that. And then finally, it's just keeping up with the regulations. I mean, David, I don't know if you're aware of this, but, on one side, you've got, I'll take Canada. I was just there. Their AI and Data Act that they had proposed last year failed. And so they have no national guidance on what they're supposed to do. So then they can look south of the border to the United States, where the Trump administration has notably pulled up on the stick on the safety elements and really said, we need to be more on the innovation side, go, go, go. Kind of almost the same as the drill, baby, drill. But basically, look, and then I think there is an actual valid point in there that there's a concern that China's running away with this, and we don't want to regulate ourselves too much. And so there's been a big swing back to that side. And then you got the EU AI Act, which seems to be the leader in the world on regulatory things of this nature. I mean, just the ability to get that number of countries to agree on such a complex topic in such a fast timeline is remarkable, considering that you can't get 3 states in the United States to agree about anything. And you get these disparate countries to do this. It's remarkable. Now, I still can't put a commentary on whether it's the right regulation or not, but the Brussels effect is real. And the EU AI Act is putting real teeth into their regulations here. And so you need to pay attention because the EU is it's a big area of business to do business in. So those are the 3 areas I think that have been the biggest challenge from an AI governance standpoint.
What do you think are the main challenges and threats or risks that businesses should be aware of generally when they're looking to kind of adopt AI into their business?
Well, I don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself too much, but I will go back to this concept of data because it's very much a garbage in, garbage out situation. And so I would say 2 things. One is it's really hard to add thoughtful regulation or thoughtful governance and policy on the back end as a bolt on. It's maybe a little bit more challenging upfront, but aligning your AI North Star, if you will, aligning your AI policy to your corporate mission and your mandate is critical because it really helps all the other decisions you make really stem from that. And it actually will streamline things because you won't over govern yourself, right? Or you won't sort of paint yourself in too many corners if you understand, oh, we can let that stuff go, but we do need to make sure that we have, this solved over here, whatever that might be. So I think truly getting the right people in the room around establishing policy that aligns to your mission is number one. And that's really sort of a strategic early stage approach. And you could do that in parallel with doing pilots and things like that. But I think that that's really the first thing to really think about. And not a lot of people know where to start with that. So I understand some of the challenges there. But I guess what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is it's got to be a business and a strategic thing. AI is not a technology. It's not buying a new kind of word processor. This is cultural. It's strategic, and it's enterprise-wide adoption. And so it is a business problem to solve, a business challenge, business opportunity. I always feel like I make it sound way too negative. It's not. I think the way I think is if I can minimize the downside, I spend more time minimizing the downside of things that I'm passionate about, that I think that I'm optimistic about. So then I can sleep and then I can stand in my soapbox and say, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if I still have that stuff below that I don't feel comfortable with, so I exercise those demons early, and then I can be the biggest cheerleader in the world, because I really do feel like AI is enormously powerful and we can't ignore it and we need to lean in. But I like to eat my vegetables first, so to speak. So I think that's one is really that it's a strategic decision, that this is a cultural shift, not just a technological shift, and you need to bring your team along with you. There's a thing called shadow. There's, how shadow AI, when people are using stuff. I think there's a flip side that's even worse, which is shadow resistance. And I think there's a sense that we just assume that if you can work a mouse, that you're probably open to using AI. And you'd be surprised at how many people are still nervous about if I put something up there, is it going to get into a training? Not knowing what they can and can't do. Also just being afraid of it. So the fear, I think there's shadow resistance in organizations that slows down adoption and all that stuff. So again, that starts with strategy. And I think communication helps with that too. So once you have a strategy, you then need to bring people along for the ride. So making sure you get HR, some people call it people and culture area, but human resources, whatever that is called in your organization, if you get them in the loop, now you have the professional development, the cultural element, the hiring and staffing, what we're looking for in new employees, how we look at training. There's a whole cultural element there that shouldn't be run by some technology department, right? I mean, and so again, it starts with that strategy, but then you end up with, okay, let's get HR involved. And now we think about, okay, this is multidisciplinary. This is cross-functional. So now we've got legal involved because there are these regulations. And I don't know, if I look at a legal document for more than 5 seconds, I get dizzy and pass out. Like that is not how I can't read legal documents. So thank goodness we have an amazing legal team that can help navigate the regulatory stuff, help to write the policy in the right way. So now I've got legal involved, I've got HR involved, and we've got the C-suite. And once you have those things in place, then you can start really looking at the AI that's the right AI for us, and not just sitting at a bunch of people in front of a screen and letting them prompt away and learn. What are you bringing to the table from an enterprise perspective? It's very easy for 500 people to do ChatGPT on their own. Where's the cross learning? Where is how do I know what prompts you're using? How do I leverage those prompts, the best of breed prompts for somebody else down the hall? You're losing all this really good collaborative knowledge and domain transfer. So what technologies can you use? For example, Amazon Bedrock allows you to deploy AI at an enterprise level and then integrate various models that meet your needs. Claude is an example. But of course, Amazon Bedrock's not the only one out there. Microsoft has, Copilot, and they're doing similar things. But I guess the point is, just notice that I didn't start from which AI am I going to buy, right? And then the final thing and most important thing after all of that is, if your data is not ready to be used for AI, you are going to fail. I mentioned this earlier. So data, data, data. If you can get your data in order, organized, understood, then you can hand 17 documents to a generative solution and say, summarize these, instead of trying to figure out which 17. Because if you give it the wrong ones, or if you try to put 1 million documents, it's never going to work anyway, right? So how do I take what is crucially unique to my organization, which is my data? Your data is your net worth. It's your true fingerprint that's different than the company down the street. It's what makes you, it's your unique identifier. It's your competitive advantage is your data. How can I leverage that data appropriately in AI, as opposed to how can I try to fix my unstructured data using my AI? That's not how it works. You really need to eat your vegetables first, as I said, to get the AI right. Go back over that. I guess that's a strategic thinking about AI and really getting it aligned to your goals and your mission, getting that multidisciplinary team across, legal, HR, and so on, and product, and then really understanding your data at a critical level. That's probably the hardest thing to do, is to understand and manage your unstructured data, get it organized. But fortunately, that's what we do. Like, we do that as a living, so that makes it easier for us. But that's why it's harder for companies to think about these things, is that they don't want to touch that. They want AI to fix all of that. But anyway, I hate to give you that long-winded answer because it's a lot, but those are the critical areas that I would focus on when trying to ensure that I adopt it for the long haul and to do it successfully.
I think kind of aligned and consistent with what we're talking about here is AI is just not that simple kind of plug and play that many of these businesses that are just, as you said, Chat GPT with a bit of a wrapper on it. That's not really how businesses should be adopting AI. So I guess from a company stance, what it sounds like you're saying, and is it needs much more of a rigorous kind of top-down approach that has strategic planning, implementation, and guardrails around it, as opposed to, and what I've observed with a number of businesses, a more bottom-up approach whereby all different teams and all their various silos are kind of going out experimenting with AI to see how it can make them more effective in their job, And then there comes the problem of actually who's governing this, who's actually understands what data is going where. And it seems like a big mess for someone has to kind of come in and solve retrospectively.
Well, and I also think that the two can actually coexist. I don't think anyone really has time to do the full top down, because by the time you get to the bottom, it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You're going to have to start all over again. And as I understand it, and I think this might still be the case, they never stop painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Once they
Wow.
finish, you get to the end, they go back and they start over again. I don't know if that's an old myth. I love the story though, because it paints a really interesting image for me. Yes, stop top down, communicate. I do think it needs to be endorsed by the leaders in the organization. One of the things they did here when they rolled out AI internally is they made the executive team do it first. Now, that's a really unique approach. And I think it's spot on, because it's usually the bottom up and people, sort of do the techie thing and then they just go upstream and get the right person to sign a PO and then they can adopt. This is more of a, hey, we've made a commitment at the top of this organization that we're going to leverage AI and do it safely. Our executives are doing it first, then the senior level team, and then roll it out to the entire organization. Now, meanwhile, there are skunk works projects that need to happen. There is some experimentation, but if those can be done with some guardrails around them, I think those should be encouraged. Hackathons. Let's get together. Who comes up with the best idea of how we can leverage AI in this company? So I think you can kind of do a bottom up and top down at the same time, but it does have to have that. There's slightly ahead on the top down part, because the communication downstream about, what we're doing, why it's important, that we're committed to this. And, it's part of all of our roles to adopt this in a safe way and give people outlets and how to talk about this, how to get the training on this. So yes, I don't think you can afford to do it just top down, because by the time you get to the bottom, it's a little bit too late.
Gotcha. So we can combine that top down, bottom up, and kind of meet in the middle and take that
There you go.
strategic as well as the sort of the tactical approach, assuming and as long as we have the guardrails in place, that all these things, the skunk work that's getting done is being done sort of responsibly.
Absolutely. I mean, let's get this straight. It's a messy process because AI is still new, and so it's always going to be a challenge. But if you can, as my golf instructor once said, you're never going to hit the golf ball straight all the time. But if you do enough things right, you can't go too far off, right? So it's minimizing of the things you do wrong, especially the truly risky things. And depending on if you're regulated, depending on, the nature of what you do, you need to make sure that you're protected on those downside risks. And if you can mitigate those, then allow a little bit of messiness, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. But again, do the right things right, get the right things in place, and then celebrate some of the little mishaps and goofiness, because this is where the magic happens. Like if you're afraid that everything has to be perfect in a neat little box, it's not going to be that way with AI for at least a few years until things settle.
And following that theme, is there any kind of quick, actionable kind of tips and advice you would give to businesses around how and where they can kind of adopt AI in their businesses whilst doing it in the most kind of effective and responsible way?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it falls into what we've already said, but to reiterate a couple of the key points, I think, first of all, I think recognizing that it is a cultural shift, not a technological one, and therefore allowing more people into the room than IT, I think is critical. I think it's just sort of encouraging that experimentation, that exploration beyond the IT group, beyond the engineers, into the knowledge worker class, right? Into the domain experts, into the people close to the problem. It almost needs to be in this way, I think a middle out approach works really well, where you have the people closest to the customer, for an example, or closest to the business problem, closest to the data, working hand in hand with some of those technical ones that can bring them along for that ride. I think this is just where collaboration and cross-functional engagement is so key. Let's face it, we've just come out of a very interesting period with COVID. that put us all at different places. That's also affected cybersecurity tremendously, right? Because it used to be everyone's in the building and I have my hands around this, and suddenly 2 weeks and where is everybody? How are they accessing all this data? But it also ripped apart cultures of businesses and made it hard to work together. I think AI is a brilliant opportunity for us to come together and work more collaboratively across the aisle, so to speak, with each group. And that includes, like I said, knowledge workers working hand in hand with engineers and developers, and being able to work more autonomously without that reliance on them, because the tools are there now. If there's one thing that AI has done recently, it's empower the non-technical person. That said, you can lose control of the ship if you just say, go free and do that. So there has to be a framework in place. So one, bring everyone along for the ride, communicate effectively, but the final is make sure that there is a coherent framework around which people know what they can and can't do. And ideally, identify those high risk use cases and just eliminate those right off the bat. There are a number of people who will use, Grammarly is just a silly example, but I'll throw it out there. Seems innocuous, seems simple. What are you putting into Grammarly? Are you using the free version? Because they're not guaranteed to not use that for training data, right? As something as simple as that, if you're just helping it with your grammar, that's all well and good, but you may be putting something very dangerous up there and not know it. So this is where the structure and the framework helps to keep people out of hot water. So embracing the technology, but just doing it in a smart way. And honestly, for small startups and people coming through those early stages, which I have a very soft spot in my heart for those, money's not growing on trees, and you can do a lot of very cool things with what's out there in the open source community from Hugging Face. It's just, don't get yourself in hot water by not putting some guardrails in place for even if you're a small business. There are ways to do it in a safe way.
So I think you've provided a lot of kind of actionable insights and sort of feedback to people that, AI is a fantastic enabler, and particularly with the focus on the early stage sort of startups, it can unlock so much sort of capability within your organization. But there's just a few takeaways as to how you can do it in a much more kind of responsible and effective way. Chris, look, it's been an absolute joy having you on the podcast. Were there any kind of final thoughts or things you wanted to leave the listeners with?
Well, I just, you brought up something very, first of all, thank you for having me. I think this has been a great discussion. It recently occurred to me, I was at a trustworthy AI or responsible AI conference, and the people in the room that were presenting that day had been doing this for 10 years, so well before ChatGPT. And they were so excited and enthusiastic about the size of the room, because it used to be a bunch of people that you could fit on a bicycle would meet on these things. And the room was packed and it was an engaged audience. So one thing I would say is to any listeners out there, if you think that this is a fad or just sort of an eye roll or just an exercise, it's truly a movement, and it will be a $3 to $12 billion, industry. Just responsible AI and AI governance will be its own industry, or it's growing into that as we speak. And another anecdote is just speaking at the International Association of Data Privacy or Privacy Professionals a few months ago. I was on a panel, and it was on streamlining the workflow for AI governance within organizations, seemingly very sort of wonky, non-sexy. And I'm told it was the biggest audience of the entire, for a panel for the entire conference. So it tells you that people are interested in this subject, that it's on people's minds, and it's important. So I just thought I'd leave you with that, because it's indicative of where things are going. And but aside from that, David, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to doing one of these again with you.
Thanks so much, Chris.